Hi there, and welcome back. Off we go to another session, and this one's pretty important for a lot of players, pretty challenging for a lot of players as well. It's all about chord changing skills, getting from one chord shape to another, but even before that, just the ability to make a chord well. So let's take a little look at how generally guitarists seem to learn how to build a chord first. We'll do that. And then we'll take a look at chord changing. Because once those two skills are under control, that's when most people start to feel like, hey, I know I can play. This is cool. So, building a chord. You know, pretty much every method book I've seen will show a picture of a fretboard, and you've probably all seen it, where you've got the strings going up and down and you have the frets going across, and some shape of a chord with the correct fingers that are put inside. So the guitarist sees that picture, and their instinct right away is to build it one finger at a time. And there's nothing wrong with that. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to use the A major chord as a demonstration. I'll show this to you a little later, close up. But typically what's going to happen is someone is reading that chord chart for the A major chord. Don't worry if you don't know it. And it would go something like this. The person would put a first finger down, and then a second, and then a third. Don't worry about what the strings are right now. Again, I'm going to show this to you in a minute. And they would attempt to play it. And maybe it comes across like maybe something like that. Pretty common, very standard. But something has been put in place already. And in and of itself, it's not particularly dangerous. What's dangerous is that it doesn't change over the next number of practice sessions. And so you're getting good at doing something which is going to ultimately hold you back. And here's what it is. Okay, can you see my hand here? I'm about to play some stuff on the guitar. So I'm going to learn my first chord. Happens to be called A major. You don't need to see my strumming hand. It really doesn't have anything to do with it. So just the fretting hand over here. So the picture will tell the student to do this. They'll take their first finger, put it on the 4th string, 2nd fret. Again, this is for the A chord. They'll take the 2nd finger, and then they'll put that on the 3rd string, 2nd fret. And if they're lucky, they'll be able to get their 3rd finger onto the 2nd string, also in the 2nd fret, and squeeze them all in there. The whole thing, right inside that whole 2nd fret. So that in itself can be a challenge, because some people have pretty big fingers. I've got skinny fingers, so I can get that in there. So what typically will happen now is, once it's formed, they'll try to play it, and it'll sound a little not great. That's okay, that's part of the process, and that's not really the issue today. The issue is what happened here. Because when the student either leaves a lesson or closes that book that they're looking at, what do you think they're going to do when they get home? And they're going to try to build that chord again. I'll tell you what they're going to do. Here's what they're going to do. They're going to take their first finger, and they're going to put it where they need to, and their 2nd, followed by their 3rd. Okay, that's fine. You need to do that. Give your brain time to learn how to build that chord. Maybe throughout the day they keep coming back to the guitar, and in their own minds, and innocently so, they're practicing. So they come back, the student is practicing, and again they build the chord. 4th string, 3rd string, 2nd string, try it out. They get a bum sound, no big deal. Maybe by the end of that first day, they've repeated this process a number of times. And clearly, in their mind, they're practicing. And they are. At some point, though, and this is not rocket science, at some point, the brain is going to interpret that the way to build the A chord, or any chord for that matter, is to do one finger at a time. And the reason that it's going to feel that way is because that's the way you did it every time you came to build your chord. If you're lucky, a teacher will tell you, now listen up, this is important, will tell you that while putting one finger down at a time is important in order to get a feel for the chord, what you're striving for is to be able to come up to it and put everything down at the same time. Because that's what's happening in real playing. The building of the chord, if it's one finger at a time, I think you can appreciate it's just going to slow down what your strumming hand is doing. It's going to get in the way too much. Because you always have to wait for the chord to get fully formed before you can start to strum. At the very beginning, there's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong. What happens is that that's as far as it goes, as far as information is concerned. The student also needs to be told that this is just the beginning. The rest of practice now has to involve training the hand to come down and put all fingers down at once. Now I know everybody complains about that process. It's not an easy one to do. Fair enough, the hand has to learn to make all these subtle shapes, and it takes time. But again, let's put it back in piano mode. I pick on them a lot. When a student in piano reaches out to create a chord, you'll have to pretend there's a keyboard right here, their hand automatically sort of molds to the location of where the different keys are for that particular chord, and those fingers hover over those notes for a brief moment just before the piano player pushes them all down, unless it's called for to be played one at a time. Okay. They will reach for the whole chord in whatever distorted shape the hand needs to make, find those notes, play them. This is exactly the same thing you're doing in guitar, or I want you to do in guitar. Now, again, don't get me wrong, it's a slow process. I get that. But the problem is that if you keep doing the building, the one finger at a time itis, I call it, and that's the way your brain thinks about building chords, here I am building a whole bunch of them one finger at a time. If that's the way your brain thinks about it, because that's how you've been doing it, well, guess what? You're going to get really good at doing it really inefficiently. Okay? And we don't want this. What you want is this. You see that? That's an A, a D, a G, a C, an E minor, an F, another G. You know, this is what you're looking for when you're changing chords. You're not looking for this A, D, G, E, bar, and then the other fingers for a bar chord if you're working on those. You're looking to get everything down at the same time. The fact that you have to struggle with it, it's not entirely your fault, it's physiology. It's habit. The only reason people are able to throw chords down so quickly when they're playing tunes and grab things is habit. They've been at it a lot, and somewhere in the process they've come to enjoy doing it. So you do have to do that. There's no quick way around it. But there are some things you can do to help facilitate the process. So I'll come back to the A chord for a moment. This is not, actually I'm going to use a C. This is a good example. It's a little more spread out, might be a little easier to see it. So typically I find even for this C major chord, students tend to bring the first finger in and then they slowly build the chord up. Again, the beginning, not a big deal. Do it. Spend a whole day just getting used to it. But start not doing that pretty quickly. Try doing this instead. Once you know where the fingers go, how about instead of just putting one finger down, which is how you started, how about you train your hand to put two of the fingers down, maybe just the first and the second finger. Put two down at the same time. Give your brain a chance to feel what that's like, and then put your third finger in place. Hey, why stop there? why don't you bring the second and the third finger in at the same time? Instead of one after the other, like that, bring them in, put them down at the same time, and then add the first finger. Why stop there? Why not, this is harder now, bring the first and the third finger in at the same time, and then drop the second finger down. All those procedures are going to help you organize what it feels like to have two fingers or more come down simultaneously. Ultimately, we want all three, in this case, coming down for many of these chords. That's one approach that you can take. If you're the kind of student that has gotten used to building chords, I think my dog's wandering around here, making a lot of noise. If you've been playing for a while and you've gotten used to this process, very often I'll tell a student, start doing the reverse. Instead of going first, second, third, build the chord 3, 2, 1. Do it backwards for a while. It's going to feel very weird because you're asking the weaker finger, this guy, to come in first. Right? So what we're looking for are strategies to either prevent you from developing bad habits in the first place, or strategies to help alleviate bad habits that have developed. So the same procedure will apply for any chord. You know, there will be little subtle changes according to the shape and whatnot, especially when it comes to bar chords. So a lot of people put maybe the bar first and then try to do the fingers, or they'll put the fingers down first and then bar. You've got to be able to grab it all at once. And of course, in my studio, I spend a lot of time with students on these exact strategies to make sure that they get it right. So we're just scratching the surface here. Okay, so that's building a chord. Try to get it all at once. Don't worry about the sound so much. Leave that aside for a moment. And really concentrate on how you're choreographing your fingers coming down. If you catch yourself, excuse me, if you catch yourself doing one finger at a time, remember that that is not your goal. You have not learned to build that chord right now. Your goal is to get all the fingers down at once. So what's happening real close up? If you could slow down real style playing, I'll play a little bit here. I can actually play it. Check this out. I'll play G, D, I don't know, I'll just make something up here. So G, D, E minor, F. Now I want to show you this. Here I am playing G. Getting the first chord's no big deal, although again you don't want to set it up one finger at a time. You want to go boom. Okay? So now I'm going to go to D. Watch this. I'm going to tilt in a little bit, see if you can see this, right like that. Watch this. I'm moving the fingers and I'm reorganizing them to make a D shape. I'll hold that right in front of you. There it is. Okay? That's, by the way, that's not easy. That comes from habit. That comes from repetition. So if repetition's not your friend, this process is going to be tough. You have to do it often. So I've reorganized the fingers to take on the shape of a D, pretty much approximately, and then all I have to do is drop the fingers down. So my point there is that the general shape of the chord, through repetition, I have to emphasize that, your hand takes on an ability to mold the shape of the chord without having to rely on the strings as crutches to build the chord. A good strategy to train your hand to do that is when you're making and learning chords, don't push the strings down very hard, if at all. Just touch them. Just touch them, because you're going to be spending less time sort of making the chord per se in terms of a good sound, and more time concentrating on how the fingers have to mold themselves. But the point is that just before the chord gets played, it's actually formed in space. Just milliseconds before it actually comes down. There's the key. That will be the final stage of chord training. If you're still stuck one finger at a time, then you're not there yet. That has to go away because this keeps interfering with rhythm, believe it or not. Okay? We need to get you to a point where you can go bing, 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 boom, boom, all happening in one swoop. That's our goal. That's chord changing. Now we'll move on to the other topic that is related to chord building, of course, and that is the notion of getting from one chord to another. Not a big deal if somebody built the A chord to take a few moments just to construct it and start playing. That's not a big deal. The issue is when it's time to leave that chord and maybe, let's say, go to D, what tends to happen is this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, ready, change. Oh, wait, hold on. Okay, got it. Now, of course, they do eventually get it. But what's happened is that the flow of the music has gotten disrupted. The drummer had to stop, the keyboard player had to stop. Everything had to stop until the guitar guy could find the chord. Clearly, that's not acceptable. Again, at the very, very beginning, it's totally all right. It's new. That's expected. But we want to get to the skill of chord changing quickly. So this is where I really encourage people to, a couple of things. Either look for fingers or certain notes that you were holding in the chord, common strings, common frets, and see if where you're going next somehow relates to the next chord, so that minimizes the amount of motion you have to make. Great example is going from A to D. So again, I'm going to bring this in a little closer. Now, here's the A chord, and I want you to concentrate on this third finger of mine. Watch what happens to that finger. I'll come in like that. Watch what happens to that finger when I go to the D chord. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, slide, put the other fingers down. Now, I want it to happen all at once, of course. But my point is that that finger does not need to come off with everything else, only to go right back down on the same string a split second from now. You might as well realize that it's on the same string and just perhaps slide it up to where it needs to be. I'm still in contact with the string the whole time. Slide up and get it in place. Okay? So that's one strategy. And you should look for these connections if possible. Of course, not every chord change is going to have that. There are certain changes that are just leaps of faith, I call them. Like, for example, an A to a G, there's really nothing in common between those two, and you just have to have the ability to get where you're going well established in your hand. But common string is one solution. A common note is another solution. Let's say perhaps I'm going from a C, watch my first finger now, a C to A minor. You'd be surprised how many people don't realize that this note and this finger that's making the note is common to both chords, so that as they leave C, they rip everything off and they come back and build the A minor. And they can play this for a long time and never realize that that note is common to both chords. If it is, why not keep the finger there? Okay? So you can have common strings changing frets. You can have common strings in the same frets. If you can see that within the chord change, try to take advantage of it. There's one other. There's one other that I want to talk about. Let's say you're going from D to G. There's really not a common note, or common string rather, between the two that you can keep a finger on. But what you could do is ask yourself, of the three notes that make up my D chord, which one, let's say, moves the least? Like when you end up here in G, which of those three fingers moved the least? Turns out it's the third finger. All it had to do was jump from the second string to the third, And then these other guys had to do a cross-Atlantic journey, transatlantic journey to get to their notes. So I often suggest to people, find a place that one finger can move to that's pretty close to where it already is, and get that guy there first, and then worry about the other stuff. That's one strategy. It's not the best, but it's a good awareness strategy. Okay, so we've got three of those strategies that you can rely on: common string, changing fret, or a common note in both chords, or moving to strings or notes that are relatively close to where you currently are. Taking advantage of all that is very good. Second thing you want to try to do is, as you move from one chord to the next, think of your fingers as sort of brushing the strings. It's not this. Check this out. It's not this. There's D, and then you lift them off, and then you bring the notes for G in, then you lift them off, and then you bring the notes for C in. It isn't that. It should be D. Now hug the strings, stay close to them. I just went to G. Now hug the strings, I'm hugging and I'm getting close to C. Now hug the strings, I'm trying to form F. Now hug the strings, I'm forming A minor. The whole time my fingers are kind of caressing the strings. I know that sounds very sensual, but that's really what a lot of people are doing when they play well. They're learning to kind of magnetically stick to the strings. It's not lift and play, lift and play, lift and play. This takes too much time, right? So try to brush your fingers over the strings as you change to get from one to the other. So those are all little helpful hints, but the real strategy here to get from one chord to the other is you've got to know the chords. You've got to know them so well in your mind that you could verbally describe to somebody without any hesitation what any of those chords have to do in order to look the way they look. It might sound something like this. I'm on a C chord, and I'm going to go to G. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you without even moving these fingers, okay? My third finger, this guy, is going to go down to the first string, 3rd fret. My first finger is going to the 5th string, 2nd fret, and my second finger is going to the 6th string, 3rd fret. If I can't say that with a certain degree of assurity, then my brain doesn't completely understand how to get to that chord. Because as I'm moving, I want to organize those fingers. And I'm not touching the strings at this point. This is all muscle memory in the hand. Okay? I want to be able to know that chord so well that I can literally tell those fingers kind of where to hover in space before I plop them down onto the guitar. Right? So your ability to know verbally, choreograph verbally where things are going, very important. Any tool you can use to clarify how the next chord looks, excuse me, and how it relates will help you. And of course, this is a piece of advice that really seems to piss a lot of people off. It has to be done so slowly that at every step of the way you feel in control. There's never a moment where you're thinking, uh-oh, I've kind of forgotten it, I'm not sure what I'm doing. If that's occurring, then that's clear. You're not sure what you're doing, and why should you expect to see great results from it? So I think the key feature for good chord changing is certainly chord awareness. You need to be able to be very clear on the mechanics of that chord, how it's made, what strings it's on, what fingers you're using. You know, and a good test is to be able to verbally describe that to somebody who doesn't care. I often suggest that. That's a good thing to do, and get them to do it. And you'll be surprised how difficult it is. So the clearer that is in your mind, the easier you're going to be able to choreograph making those changes to go in there. Again, I don't want you to do this, for example, going C to G. You don't want to leave this and then get into your old habit of building the G chord one finger at a time, and then building C, and then building G, and then building... You don't want that. You want this. So a really good thing to do would be start off with your first chord, Take your time, form it, whatever it takes. When it's time to move, and I'm going to go to a G chord. When it's time to move, I'll remove the fingers. I'll tilt this way a bit. I'll remove the fingers. And then the very best I can, however awkward it feels, I'm going to organize my fingers in the shape that I feel the next chord is. And that's not easy, but you have to take some time to work at that. And I'll get it into a rough shape of the chord before I finally drop it down. And I might even miss the correct strings. But that's okay, because the brain is still learning, in a sense, the stress of making the shape without having to touch any strings. See, I think sometimes the strings themselves turn out to be our worst enemy. We keep using them as crutches. I'll grab this first, and once that's in place, then I'll grab this, and that's my second crutch, and then I'll grab this, and on I go. Excuse me. And so a great way to train is to not touch any strings, but form the chord as best you can in space just before it hits where it's supposed to hit. Tremendously powerful training. It feels like it takes longer, and it probably does at the beginning of your training, but the payoff is that it speeds up the learning of newer and newer chords because you're going through the same process with them, and eventually it becomes second nature. So this holds up for most people quite well. There's always going to be the odd chord that you run across that just doesn't fall well under your fingers, right? E7 sharp 9, or sorry, this one is a C7. That chord shape for me has never fallen under my fingers very well. I still, if you notice me, look, I'm doing this and then it's that. I'm getting these three fingers down and then this. I almost can't get that thing to fall under my fingers properly. I get it made fast enough so that it works, but to come down all at once, almost always my pinky comes down last. You know, I have to accept some limitations with my art form, and you probably will have to as well. But that doesn't stop me from pretty much being able to get that chord pretty quick. So everybody's got some chord that gives them a bit of grief. We're talking general practices for general chords. So give that a try. Check out the PDF as well, of course. Read through there. And I hope that gives you some fresh ideas to think about in terms of chord changing. It's a big area. Don't overlook it. Don't develop bad habits that you'll have to change later, because it will take a long time to change them. And I hope you do well with these ideas and implement this stuff as quickly as you can. All right, that's it for chord building and chord changing. I'll see you in the next session. See ya.